Welcome to the Intrinsic First Leadership Podcast. I'm Aaron Robbins with Intrinsic First. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Be sure to stick around to the end for some debatably funny jokes that will hopefully leave you with a smile. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes. We're here to support you, and we'd love to hear from you. So drop us a comment below or reach out to us directly at info@intrinsicfirst.com. Ready to dive into the world of leadership? Let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We are in our final session on the prepare practice of leadership in context. We've talked about disposition. We've talked about values, and then we talked more about values. And now we're going to be talking about persona, which is the third piece of the triad for prepare. So looking forward to getting into this. This is a fun one.
It can be. Depends on who you want to be.
Yeah.
No. But
That's true.
This is an elusive one because it involves the shadow self, meaning the self we don't want to ever acknowledge, and it's a mask ultimately that we put on. Conveniently put on when we don't know what to do, or for that matter, when we do something that others want us to do, when it's not authentic behavior. So the persona is and also it covers your presence, your understanding of yourself in the past, your understanding of yourself that you want to become in the future. And those kinds of things are, it's an inner life is what it is. And some people have a hard time with it. So we're going to talk about the mask of your self you want to become. You know you're not, but you want to become. The mask that you know that others want you to be. And that's always a tough thing because you're living with other people's perceptions and expectations for what you are or will be. So, and then there's the one inside that you know you're not, and so there's a lot of doubt that comes out of it. There's a lot of sadness that comes out of it, and so I want to help people begin to understand that the persona is ever-changing. Past of self, presence of sense of self, and future self. So I always like to ask executives, well, who's your favorite leader? And then, and what does he or she do that you really like? It doesn't even have to be a leader. They could be a comedian, or they could be a movie star. And basically becoming grappling with various character possibilities for you, and it can be through the values, it can be through their voice intonations, even how they laugh, because you get pressure in who you are through your life experiences from institutions such as your church, or perhaps your school, or perhaps a club that you belong to. And if you stop and think about it, there are lots and lots of places where people expect you to do things and you haven't got a clue either how to do it, or better yet, whether you want to do it or not. Persona, self that you want to become, self that you think you are, and the self that you think other people want you to be. So stop and think about it. who is a favorite leader for you, and why are they a leader, and what attracts you to that, and then turning and look back at to say, well, to what extent do I try to become that person? Oftentimes, it's so unconscious that you don't even understand it, or you do understand it and know that you're not there, and that makes you either angry, sad, on one side, or happy on the other. But it's a changing, ever-changing battle with yourself that results in you being sad or unsatisfied with who you are. Can you imagine what the pressure must be in certain circumstances for children to be something they're not? I mean, if you go to any child activity that might be sponsored by parents. I once was a coach of a third grade girls basketball team, and I had this one student, one young lady whose parent ultimately, her father ultimately wanted her to be the new best basketball player she could be. Now, that's a reasonable thing. But he would be running down the court yelling, "Play defense, get a body, dude." And I'm going, where is this guy coming from? Who's the coach? What's going on? He says, "Come here." It says for timeout. And I said, "Would you please do me a favor and sit over here and let's talk once the game is over? Because I'm not sure you're being helpful to this young woman or this young coach." And she's running down the court, yelling, "I am playing defense. I am playing defense." Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So it got to the point where this young lady would come to practice, and she would be dropped off at one end of the parking lot. And that's where she'd stay. No, come on, Deb, come on up here. And I said to her, "So we're going to do some layup drills." I don't want to. I said, "You don't want to." You don't want to do any of the practice drills?" She said, "No." I said, "Good. Well, I want you to sit down over here on the bench and watch everybody else, okay? Because I don't want you to play if you don't want to play." And I know it comes from the expectations of somebody else that she resents or doesn't feel she can ever meet. I don't know.
I mean, it happens all the time in youth sports. I mean, you got the dad that wants their kid to be the best baseball player or whatever, and they're living vicariously through their kid, right? It happens all the time, and you see it, and then there's this huge disconnect between the child and the
had
dad.
one when Ben was playing soccer. They were awful. They're 5. I mean, it was a miracle if he stayed on the court, on the field, for more than a few seconds. For the most part, he spent the time with his buddy tackling each other and running to the fence and looking over the canyon. And but I would go to every game or most of the games, and there was a dad who never came to the games, but he came to one. And I guess he didn't know what to expect, but he had his expectations, or he had his expectations. They were not aligned with what was reality, and he was so mad. And he's just like you said, he's running up and down the field on the line on the other side. He was watching from the other side. The coach and all the other parents are on one side, and he's just running back and forth. "What are you doing? Stop standing there! Kick the ball!" And he's just free, and I'm like, oh my God, that just can't be good for so many different reasons.
So it's awful. And so there's a psychological term that I'm very fond of helping people see, which has to do with the concept of psychological markers. And psychological markers are they're one time or instance in times of their high school or instance in time of their grammar school. Something affectively hits them right squarely in the consciousness, and all of a sudden it's like, and it stays there. And you can remember. You remember when we went in and you told me that you. It's so the psychological markers become a point in time that they define themselves by, and from that they find themselves way. They learn what either somebody wants from them, or what they aren't, or what they can't be, or what. And so many blocks, these psychological markers become part of the psyche that doesn't allow them to be free and flow and understand and appreciate what they got out of that wasn't malignant or hurtful or embarrassing. And of course, you can remember when your parents might have embarrassed you. Or it doesn't have to be your parents; it could be your buddies. You know, so those kinds of things are lurk in our minds, and they block us from being truly accurate and authentic in what we are.
I want to go back a little bit to this notion of shadow. Mm-hmm. I know Carl Jung talked about these shadow questions. Can we talk a little more like what exactly is a shadow question? Like
the shadow is the self you don't like about yourself. The shadow is the person who, or the thing that you think is the worst thing to. I'll give you an example. For me, I grew up in a very violent childhood, in which my father was a very powerful, physically powerful man, but he when he got drunk, he'd rage, and he would do things. They'd pick a fight with my mother, and then chase her around the dinner table and throwing things that were on the. Just pick up. It could have been a plate, could have been a cup, it could have been a piece of silverware, and it was a very, very traumatic, because I was holding on to the apron strings, and I was a young whippersnapper, and it impacted me in such a way that it took me a while to realize I didn't want to be that kind of person, and that I didn't want to. I didn't like to be in the midst of it, but the worst part of it was I couldn't stop it. I was embarrassed because, my mother would yell, "Go get so and so," and I'd be running out of the house to go next door to a neighbor's name, and Ken Bocci was his name, and he was a good man, and he'd come into the house, in the midst of all of this, and it would be a horror show, everything. I was embarrassed to have to stand there and do that. Now, that kind of experience, it was a number of psychic markers for me that put into my heart a lot of fear and a lot of a feeling of obligation to stop it and so forth. That kind of stuff is what people carry around in their shadow. That's the kind of thing that people carry around in their hearts. And it's very, very difficult.
So the idea is that you can't deal with it until you shine a light on it, right? Until you actually start.
I think you have to shine a light on it, but you have to do it yourself. People can't. I mean, they can say, well, tell me about your father. And, of course, we could start talking about that. But the real issue is that shining a light on it is only part of it. Shining a light on it means that you've got to begin to realize, well, what are the impacts of that behavior on other people? Not just on you, of course, but on my mother, for example, who was the object of that anger, and so that there were times in the house it was almost impossible to do anything other than to want to be alone, things like that. Now I don't want to put that on other people, but it did make me feel like I didn't want to be that way. And it did impact the way I wanted to be and who I wanted to be and what I am today as a result of it. I don't want to be burdened by it. I want to carry around it. It took me a while to realize that was between them, and the war is over.
Right. I imagine that experience affected you in ways where you were, maybe your emotions or decisions you were making, but you didn't quite understand it, and and so there's some spillover. I sense that when something traumatic like that happens.
It seems like if you relate that to persona,
Yeah.
so we're looking at a triad, right? You've got how you see yourself,
Yep.
how you wish you were, or how your expectations for
self.
yourself, how you want to be,
Yeah.
and then how you think others want you to be, right? Which is, I think, more perception than reality. Someone could actually want you to be a great person, but if you think that they want you to be somebody else, then that's really what matters. That's how you see it.
Well, let's get real and talk about some real sociological issues that you might understand. There might be in today's pressure. There's a lot of talk about tolerance for gayness, or for understanding what gender you are, what your heart tells your gender you are, and things like that. And those expectations of, let's say, coming out, and let's you have a young teenager who has the feelings of wanting to come out, different to declare a different gender than they were either born or parents would leave. And you see those kinds of pressures. Those things result in tremendous pressure between the self that others want you to be and the self that you want to be.
You want to become. And,
And imagine that, take that a little bit higher. If others don't want you to become something, want you to become something else, and you don't agree with that, and then you go a little further out, and we talk about where the pressure is coming from, societal pressures. So, for example, if the LGBT community was not as prevalent as it is in this country, or in some of the other countries, and the young person is grappling with it, and they're by themselves in the midst of it, it's not legitimized. And then put all kinds of other, I don't know the other way, prejudices that you could fall prey to, whether it's a question of gayness, or a question of a different ethnic group, all of that. I can't imagine what some of the other sort of nesses are denied.
So when you have that difference in who you want to become and who you think others want you to become, I mean, you start to see the greater that gap, you start to see all kinds of issues where we talk about like loss of identity, rejection, some esteem, whether it's from yourself or from others. Ideally, I think if you put yourself in an environment that is accepting and where those are all aligned, I don't think that they're ever truly aligned, like who we are and who we want to become. But as long as you put yourselves in an environment that allows for that to occur, I mean, that's best case scenario, I would think, right?
Well, and I think the values and disposition stuff that we've been talking about is directly impacting that. Not only the self as you see yourself, but also who you want to be. And a lot of that probably has to do with how much time you spend or effort you put in, mental effort, into understanding your own values, developing your values, and understanding your disposition. Because without that, you can't really truly know who you are or see yourself in a way that's aligned with, also who you want to become in terms of
being comfortable.
Values.
Because there's tension between the self you want to be and the self others want you to be. That's one dimension or source of it. Then there's the self that you know you are,
right.
and it doesn't measure up, or think that you are,
yeah.
and that doesn't measure up to the self you want to be,
right? Or who others want you to be, right?
So those, and that happens day after day in all kinds of roles. So let's go back now to literature, to leadership, and apply that from a leadership perspective. If the organization that you're part of expects you to ask or to act in certain ways and to fulfill certain roles, and you're not disposed to do that, or your value system does not allow you to do that, you have to somehow come to grips with, in a social marker, or with your social understandings or your emotional understandings, that you're not going to do it.
So, like, if your boss wants you to be micromanager to all your subordinates and wants you to be controlling, have controlling behavior, and you're just not, that's not your disposition and doesn't align with your values, and then you have a problem.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So, but to your point of the dynamic aspect of it, I think, think about feedback, which we're going to get into feedback in a future podcast. But maybe you're going along at work and you're thinking, I'm good, I'm great, I'm performing well, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get some feedback that you didn't expect. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not actually performing. All of a sudden, you went from feeling alignment between what others want you to be and who you see yourself, and now, boom, there's a conflict, and that could change over and over depending on who you're dealing with. And then you think of I think of people I've worked with who rationalize, and so they'll get that feedback, they'll become depressed, right? And then they go, well, that can't be right. So they'll use the biases. They'll go seek out somebody that's gonna, oh no, I like you, you're cool, right? Don't listen to them, right? And then they get on this roller coaster, maybe, where you're constantly fluctuating between feeling alignment or misalignment between those aspects.
Yeah. Let me give you one that's near dear to my heart, and that's, do you tell your truth to power?
It depends.
Do you tell your truth to power? In other words, if you're a leader, or maybe you're working for a leader that is so out of touch with who he or she is, and what they do to people, want good or bad, more to because I've been with leaders who don't want to hear your truth, or they don't want you to tell your truth if it's not.
Or better yet, they tell you to tell because they want to hear it, but they really don't want to hear it.
They don't want to hear it.
Falls on deaf ears.
Well, at one point I did that, where I just said, well, I think the best of me is to tell you, if you want to know how I feel about what you're doing, I'm going to have to say, I don't like what you're doing. Yeah. And so, and of course, managers are notorious. I mean, you know that and of course, that's some of the first scuttlebutt that comes to the new employee. Don't say that. Yeah. Whatever you do, don't. Now, and so if you've been taught and grown up that it's important that if the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, you go tell her or him.
Yeah.
You know, and so those things are just extraordinarily. I want to be truthful. I want to be fair. I want to give you what you want, which is, if you tell me, you say come on, tell me what's
because if that's your value, or that's what you believe. Like, I want to be someone that tells truth to power, and then you find yourself in a situation where you don't because you're afraid of retribution. I mean, that causes an internal conflict within yourself.
Of course.
Yeah.
I said, what? Wait a minute. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Just because that's. No, so, and if you have leaders who are vengeful, who'll go out and if you're not with me, you're against me.
They really exist. Those leaders exist.
Oh, no, they don't exist. There's not. It's like we both wouldn't say the present past president. Well, have we ever seen anything like that? No. Well, so, I know, and of course I've seen families split, just come apart. And for example, one of the things that I worked for the Catholic Leadership Institute, which was at one point training lay priests about leadership, and one of the key conflict areas is the whole issue of abortion and what we do with that, and how do you handle it, and what would that mean if one of your family members took a different position, values position on that. And one was that the one that I remember the most, it wasn't so much an abortion, is that one of the young daughters of this Catholic man wanted to go and live by herself. She wanted to move away out of the house, and as luck would have it, she wanted to move in with her boyfriend. And
before they got married.
Before they got married.
Yeah.
And the father was totally against it. And it got so bad that the daughter, moved out despite it, in the face of all this anger and threats about you're not going to get any of my support and so forth and so on. And she was one of 8 children in the family. And the father completely disowned her. It's no longer part of my family. And so she had 3 children by the young man that she married, who he was totally against. And the father never met that child, or the 3 children, never met the 3 grandchildren. And the only way he got any kind of information about it was from the other siblings that the sister was friendless with. So that kind of thing caused a tremendous schism in that family and broke. And when we got to talk to them, and both the daughter and the father, both of them realized that it wasn't worth it, and that they had split the whole family. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that what we have are pressures that we live with, that we have to begin to acknowledge and find ways to cope with, and to decide whether it's the self I want to be or the self of somebody else.
I just go back to that. I'm sorry. I just go back to that example because I'm struggle with that, because I wonder, and I know it's case by case, but for a father to make a decision like that, is he struggling with the person he wants to become, or is he struggling with other people's perception of who he should be?
Or his values.
Very, very interesting. At the time when I I had a long conversation with him. He was afraid of what the community would think if she moved out of the house, living with a young man.
I see that. I see that in my own family. I was raised Catholic. I was raised Greek Orthodox as well, my mom's side, and it's in my family. Like, what do other people think when you do X, Y, and Z? It's a big thing, and I don't know if that's the culture, that's my family, or if that's the religion influence. I mean, but I see that. I feel, this fear of other people's opinion all the time is a number one thing that affects even athletes when we study it that way.
Well, remember that your disposition's working against you in some circumstances. Obviously, if you're a highly sensitive extrovert, you can be concerned with other people outside of your either your social sphere or even your family sphere. And you're very worried about what your father might think, or mother might think, or sister might think, and those are very difficult battles, And the answers really have to come with some deep searching, some deep willingness to realize that my inner life is mine.
Kind of rolls all the way back to what you were talking about at the very beginning of that willingness to change as an individual or dig in. So that reminds me, in the book, you even bring up an analogy. I think it's actually The Leader Within, but you talk about the process or the practice of prepare, going through learning and understanding your disposition, trying to develop your values and understanding your persona. The analogy is that it's like cutting into an onion, right? Because there's layers.
Just peeling it back.
Right? You're peeling back the layers, But my favorite part about that analogy is that just like cutting into an onion, it's not going to be comfortable.
It's not.
It's going to make your eyes water. It's going to make it's probably
going to have
cry. Maybe not a great smell, and it's not easy. It's a tough thing to do.
And it takes place over many, many, many bouts of quietness and meditation. Hopefully, in some ways, I think you said shine a light on it. I love that. That was pretty beautiful. But you've got to have people around you that give you freedom to choose it without feeling like you can't choose it. I mean, the issue is really a matter of choice after sifting through what your body's telling you, what your friends are telling you, but ultimately it is your choice. And coming back to leadership now, I don't want to make it everything. I don't want to get away from the main purpose here. Is that we have leaders out there who have been pressured and who do not know the self that they want to become, have not taken a stand at, well, what is it? What am I going to do here? What the kind of person I know I don't want to act like that, like my father did, as an example. So what does that mean? How do I then, what are some of the coping mechanisms that when I'm under stress or when I'm under pressure or when I'm angry, what do I do with that? How do I begin to acknowledge what it is, and how do I separate it enough to act and what I call be mindful of the choices I have coming up? And so there's a bunch of choices that leaders make that are so socially pressured that they never get out from underneath it.
We're going long on the podcast, so let's take a break here, and we'll finish the rest of Persona next week on the next podcast. I think we need a joke for this first half.
Well, have you ever heard about the chocolate record player? It's a chocolate record player.
A chocolate record player
that plays records?
Yeah, it's real. It's made out of chocolate. It sounds pretty sweet.
I don't know. Trey didn't like that one. Sounds pretty sweet.
That's the one that made me chuckle.
Do you have a better joke?
But I was telling you about the math problem I was figuring out, how to make the number 7 even. You just take away the S.
That's like, you got to think about that for a second. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to pick back up on Persona for the next podcast, and we'll keep on talking about Persona. Thanks. Congrats! You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for tuning in. We genuinely hope that you found value in our conversation. If you liked it, please click that like button below and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on our current episodes. And if you didn't like it, you can click the dislike button, but make sure you click it twice. We're eager to hear from you, whether it's your thoughts, questions, topic ideas, or if you're interested in our leadership training and consulting support. Leave us a comment below or reach out to us directly at info@intrinsicfirst.com. We're open to any and all feedback. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to having you back for more insightful leadership discussion. Until next time.